Hello, Thunder Wizards. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about the Norse gods and how to connect them to the planets in astrology. Before we go any further, please make sure to subscribe. If you like this video, hit the bell button so you can be notified whenever I upload a video. And go up here to astrology.thunderwizard.com. This month only, August of 2019, I am slashing my price in half for astrological readings. So if you want to save $200 on a reading, go to astrology.thunderwizard.com. Okay, so astrology and the Norse gods. Now, you might be, if you're unfamiliar with me or my channel, you might be asking, how the hell can you make this kind of connection? Well, when you hear me explain the connection of the gods to the planets, it'll make a lot of sense to you. So first, we should just talk about what the planets are, right? So from my little scientific understanding of the planets, let's just focus on our solar system. Our solar system, we have the sun. The sun is the center, and then all of the other planets in our solar system are orbiting around the sun. And it is actually quite true that the sun is the mother of all things. It's the mother of all of the planets, and it's the mother of human beings. And that is literally, if you were to take all of the components of my body and break it down into different molecules and elements, they all had their genesis in the sun. The sun created them and shot them out and did whatever the sun did. And as a result, when human beings were formed in whatever belief system you want to adopt, the building blocks for all life and animals, including humans, was found on the earth, and everything in the earth came from the sun. So our ancestors, and as it turns out, many shamanic peoples, and if you go back in time, even people now who worship the sun as male or see the sun as male, if you go back far enough in time, you will find that they saw the sun as a goddess. And my ancestors were no different. The fact the word sun, Sunna, is the name of the goddess, the sun, and she was the mother. We see this in the Vedic tradition, and the Vedic tradition and the Norse tradition are both offshoots of an original Indo-European tradition. So the reason why I go back and forth between the Vedic and the Norse is because I have a deep understanding of both of them, and as it turns out, they're both sister religions coming from an original Indo-European source religion. And we're going to talk about, you'll see as I talk about the names of the planets, you'll see how there is no difference, So, for me, I really believe in being educated. I believe in being educated and being knowledgeable, especially when it comes to spirituality. It's very hard for me to have any kind of compassion for people who don't bother to learn about their own religion. And many people don't. They just follow their religion because that's how they they grew up, or that's, and they don't, I can remember a while back, I've got a lot smarter followers now, but I remember really early on, I remember seeing comments on some of my earlier videos from people saying, well, I appreciate what he's talking about, but what's with the Vedic? That's different. The Vedic is a sister Indo-European religion, and if you understand that, you will understand your Northern European religion even better, and vice versa, by the way. It goes both ways. So we'll start with the sun. Sunna. Sunna is the feminine aspect of the sun. And the feminine and the masculine are both there. We'll talk about the masculine in a moment. But the feminine aspect of the sun is Sunna. And for those of you who are new, you may not have heard me explain this, but I'll explain it again. The sun is nothing more than a big giant ball of hydrogen gas. And there are other elements and stuff in there too, but it's mainly hydrogen gas. And the hydrogen, and when you get closer to the core of the sun, is being squished by massive amounts of gravity, because the sun is very massive. So at the center of the sun is all of this gravity, and it is so intense that it causes nuclear fusion. It causes the hydrogen molecules to collapse and explode in on themselves. That nuclear explosion of all of that energy is what ends up, it bounces around inside of the sun for a very long time. I don't know, I think it might even be years, I'm not sure. But it bounces around inside of the sun, and then it makes its way out. And the light and the heat that comes out is the rays. So the rays that hit you of light and heat were originally hydrogen atoms that were smashed together, maybe thousands, or I honestly don't know. It was a long time ago. And then it makes its way out and it gets to you. And so the masculine aspect of the sun, which we would call Ra, and we see that in a lot of languages, not just Indo-European. Obviously, you're familiar with Ra, the sun god, in the Egyptian religion, and that's a different language to my knowledge. But you have that same root in our word ray, the ray of the sun. It's the same root. Same with the rune for the track of the sun, which is Raito, R-A-I-D-H-O, Raito. And where we get the word ride, it means to ride, you're the track. When you ride a horse, the sun rides in the sky in that same track from east to west. And so that's the masculine. Order, the rule, following the law. That's Raito, right, doing the right thing. That's the masculine. The feminine is Sunna. Now you take that word Sunna and you look at it in the Vedic tradition, and you see Shunyata, which is something that is you see more in the Buddhist tradition, which again is an offshoot of the Vedic religion as well. Buddhism is an offshoot of the Vedic religion. And they use that same word Shunyata, and it's the feminine, and it means emptiness. And that is exactly what it is. At the center of the sun is this giant emptiness, gravity, which is compressing things and creating all of that light and that heat. And as it so happens, the surface of the sun is cooler than the rays of the sun that are beyond it. And again, so you see the difference between internal versus external, and the external is the masculine, the expressive. That's where all the heat is. So we start with that. Now the default direction for worship and all over the world, but this was true in the Indo-European tradition and is true even in the language that we speak, and I'll show that to you in a moment. But the default direction for the sun is east. You face east to worship the sun. And so that is the direction of the sun. And if you want to generally honor the sun, you face east. And that is why, people face east all over the world to do their rituals and all of that, because the sun rising in the morning was extremely important, because that was very symbolic of the mother sun coming to give the life to the world. And so that was the default direction. It so happens that is found in our language. The word north means left and under. And so I'm down here in the southern hemisphere, so this doesn't apply here. But in the northern hemisphere, because the curvature of the Earth, guess what's underneath? The north. You're actually going down as you go towards the north. And it is, if you're facing east, the north is to your left. So that tells you that, when you were aligning yourself with directions, you would face east, and then you would figure out where the rest of the directions were. Okay, north, left, and under, right? And there are still people today, it's getting less and less, but there are still people today, if you put them in a box and blindfold them and spin them around, if you give them enough time, they can sense where the directions are. So we used to be able to feel the directions. And so east was where you oriented yourself, and that is the direction of the sun. Now, let's talk about the second sun in our universe. The second sun in our universe is Jupiter. Now, Jupiter doesn't quite have enough mass to become a sun. If it did, if it had more mass, it could have collapsed in on itself and become a star. But it doesn't have quite enough. But in terms of gravity and mass, it is second only to the sun. It has a huge magnetic field that has a huge impact on the whole solar system. And in the Norse mythology, you hear about Thor, who does things. I can't remember the myth. I'll have to find it and read it to you. But basically explains the asteroid belt and how Jupiter protects the Earth from this asteroid belt that's in the middle of our between Jupiter and the outer planets. There's this asteroid field there that if Jupiter with its massive magnetic and gravitational field wasn't doing what it's doing, sort of cleaning things up, we would be getting pelted a lot more by life-destroying asteroids. So the east is also the direction for Jupiter, and there's no coincidence that both Jupiter and the sun have this connection. Jupiter is like it wishes it could become a sun, and so Jupiter represents the king. If the sun is the queen, the mother, and in the Vedic tradition you have Aditya, which is the mother of the gods as well as Aditya. And if you want a father for the planets, it would be Jupiter. Jupiter represents the king of the heavens. So in many Indo-European traditions, in the Greek tradition, in the Roman tradition, the name for Jupiter, in fact, Jupiter itself means sky father. And so if the moon is the sky mother, then Jupiter would be the sky father. That's different from the Norse tradition of who the king is. So Odin is not Jupiter, in case you're going there and you want to say, oh, Odin is the All-Father. He's Jupiter. No, Odin is a latecomer. We'll talk about him when we get to Mercury. And as I think about it, it really makes sense because Mercury really is the ruler of our world. Without Mercury, we would not have technology. And Odin is representative of that shift, and we'll talk about that. So you've got Jupiter in the east as well, and in the Vedic tradition, it says that Jupiter. No, sorry, I got it backwards. It says that the sun sits in the east and worships Indra in order to gain long life and the power to rule. So, Indra is associated with Jupiter. Indra means the king of the full moon. I won't get into that. If you've watched my channel, you know I've etymologically parsed that out for you. But Indra means the king of the full moon. And what is the king of the moon? What lords over the moon? The sun. Because without the sun, the moon doesn't shine. The moon, from our perspective, uh, does two big things that we can see and are aware of. One is the tides. The moon affects the tides, which is the ocean. What is the ocean? The ocean is our emotions, our unconscious, our instincts. And people's moods are affected by the moon. You know, full moon, no moon, it does affect people's emotions. So, and the oceans are affected. They're constantly in motion because of the moon. Our emotions are constantly in motion. Our mind as well. You know, the whole reason that we meditate is to be able to bring our mind some stability. And so people who have calm emotions are able to think better. And so this is why we meditate. We meditate to be able to have that serenity in our emotions so that we can see things objectively and take conscious action. And those of you who work with me, you hear me talk about this a lot. And we'll talk about that when we get to the moon, so I'll save that for later. So what we're doing is we're going to go clockwise here, and we're starting with the east. So the east is where the sun is, right? So on the right side of that, on the right side of this picture is the sun, which is the east. So that's where we're starting. You see up here, you know what? I've got Jupiter up there, and Jupiter, if I were to place Jupiter somewhere, like the essence of Jupiter, it would be in the northeast. But when Jupiter goes to work, you place him in the east. So Jupiter lords over the east, but that's not where he's from. He's from, if we're talking about Thor, he's from Asgard. But he goes into the east to fight off the giants. So the eastern direction is connected to your identity, who you say you are. So it's very self-oriented. In fact, you know, the sun is the self. It's the soul. It is your identity. And so that's why it's the king. Without an identity, you're nothing. So you have to have an identity. So it's a very self-oriented direction. But the downside of the self-oriented direction is that you become narcissistic, you become like a giant, you become unaware of other people, you have no empathy, you can't relate to other beings, and other beings are just there for your, you know, resources to consume. This is what a giant is. So we need the power of Thor, and Thor, who lives in the northeast, he goes to work every day in the east. He goes off to create a boundary between narcissism and healthy self-awareness. This is why he protects human beings. That's what, anytime you read a myth about giants, giants represent a lack of boundaries in terms of your identity. Either you are acting like a giant and you're stomping on villages and biting the heads off of people and just, you know, just doing, you know, what you want to do regardless of how it affects other people. Or because of your own insecurity and because of your wanting something from other people, you open up your boundaries for predators, giants to come in and take advantage of you. So there are no victims in this world. This is why I have no tolerance for victims. And a lot of, you know, people on YouTube and a lot of people seeking spirituality understandably have a lot of trauma, and so they have a lot of victim mentality issues. I know I have in the past. I still have some that I deal with. And you know, so, but there isn't any victims in this universe. Whatever has happened, you've done it to yourself, either in this life, or you've opened it up on an unconscious level, or you've allowed it to happen as a result of past life ignorance. And we won't get into that. You know, all the victims are screaming right now. Blah, blah. Anyway, I'm not going to deal with that in this video. But the sun is the brave king. When we're talking about the masculine of the sun, we're talking about the brave king. And so, in terms of gods, the sun is Balder. So the sun is Sunna, definitely the sun. And the sun is, if you want to look at the masculine side of it, it is Balder. Balder is actually more of a metaphor for the soul, the human soul. Where Sunna is actually the sun in the sky that you look at, even though that is your soul as well. Balder is the soul of the human being. And the reason why the whole myth of Balder having to go down under the earth in the underworld, that is a symbol of our infinite soul becoming incarnated in this flesh, having to go underneath the flesh that covers it. So that's the soul. So this is why Balder brings out so much emotion. And that's what the Christmas story is all about. Christmas myth, which, you know, the Jesus myth really had nothing to do with that. It was hijacked and then turned into the myth about the sun, because our ancestors did all that. You know, at the shortest night of the year, they worshipped the soul, the sun, so that it would come back and the days would become longer. So in the East we have Sunna, and I'm not going to place Balder there, and I'll explain that to you as we get down to the south. I'll explain that later. Jupiter we've already placed. Jupiter's in the northeast, so that would be where Thor is. Thor lives in the northeast because he represents righteousness and the righteous warrior who has the highest vibration, and you have to have the highest selflessness to go and fight selfishness, which is what Thor does. So we'll come back to Thor later on. But I mentioned Indra. Indra means the king of the full moon. And Thor's name means the Lord, or the first cause of the moon. So Thunar and Inthura are the same word. They're slightly different pronunciations, but they come from the same language and the same root religion. And this is why Indra and Thor both are the lightning gods in both the Vedic and the Norse, and why Thor and Indra are lightning gods, because, as I said, it's Jupiter's magnetic field that protects the Earth, which would be human beings. Okay, so let's go further down. So, oh, there we go. This is so backwards. So let's go from east down to southeast, and there you have Venus. So Venus right there, even though that's a Latin word, Venus, in the Latin, Venus is pronounced Venus. So the V is pronounced like a W, and the E is pronounced E. And the US sound right there, or the US spelling and sound right there, Venus, that US is just a nominative placeholder. It just tells you that the case of it is nominative. Don't worry about that. Even English used to have multiple cases. We still have it in the genitive of, like Tom's. The S on Tom means it means possessive. It's Tom's fruit juice, right? And on whom, people mispronounce it all the time. To who are you talking? It's actually to whom. That's the accusative case. So our language used to have all these different endings to it. So when you see the US in anything that's in Latin, the US ending, it means it's functioning as a noun, as a nominative case, the subject. And so you can take that US off. And so that means that Venus is pronounced Wayne. And who are the Waynes? The Vanir. And so who is most associated with the Vanir? Freya. Freya is there in the southeast, and she represents She's actually standing there in the southeast representing humanity. Because the southeast is the direction of humans. This is where humans, everything that is human about us, not our soul, which is infinite, not our mind, which is the moon, but the part of us that makes us human, which is not even our intellect, which is Mercury, but the part of us that experiences life, that likes to drink good tasting, beautiful fruit juice, and wear luxurious clothes and sleep in comfortable beds and eat good food and have good sex and hang out with your friends. And that is the human experience. The human experience. We experience humanity with our body and with our emotions, and they're fused together. And this is the southeast. The southeast is also the realm of the subconscious mind, where we intend our reality. We intend our reality based on our desires. We desire to have comfort, friendship, love, prosperity, and that's when we spend time, trying to project our reality. So this is where Venus sits, Freya. Venus, you can just, the way we use the word Venus, you can just switch it out with Freya. Freya, the Wain, one of the goddesses of the Vanir. So let's continue. So moving down, sorry, this is so opposite. Moving down to the bottom here to Mars. Now, Mars in the Norse tradition is associated with Tyr or Tyr. But I have a problem with just slapping Mars on Tyr, because I don't see Tyr as a war god. He is a warrior, by all means. He's definitely a warrior, but I don't see him in the same way that I see a war god. Because a war god, and Mars in particular, Mars is all about action. And Mars is all about, and his negative side is about, not just killing the enemy and conquering, but slaughtering the enemy, skinning him, and using his skins for his bedspread. I mean, that's the Greek tradition. Mars uses the skins of his enemies as his bedspread, his blanket. So I don't see Tyr that way, because what is Tyr known for? Tyr is known for sacrifice. And Tyr, for me, represents the highest awareness. So if I were to place Tyr somewhere, I'd place him in the northeast, because that is where Jupiter sits, and actually Jupiter is strongly connected with Tyr as well, because the name Jupiter is D, which is Tiu, Tyr, Diu Pitter, Diu Father, Sky Father, the highest awareness. The Sky Father is also associated with the North Star. And the North Star represents the pinnacle of heaven, where the king of the heavens sits. So Tiu used to sit in that place. And when we get to Odin and Mercury, I'll explain to you what happened and why he's no longer the king. But he is now seen as like the general. But even then, he's not fighting wars. The person that's fighting, that's doing most of the fighting, is Thor. When you hear about fighting, Thor. You don't hear about Tiu going off to fight. And that's because Tiu is known for sacrificing his sword hand, his right hand, to the wolf Fenris. And we won't get into that whole myth, but Fenris represents the lowest vibration of human avarice, greed, fear, that wants to consume the whole world. It's not just being. It's not just being. It's not like a giant who's just selfish. We're talking about the part of the human desperation that the instincts that can never be satisfied. The black hole of need and insecurity and lust and greed that we need some of that to drive us forward, because without it we wouldn't accomplish anything. But it is so enormous that it swallows us up, and it'll swallow up the universe. And Tiw sacrificed his hand so that the other gods could bind Fenris with the magical rope of subtlety, which tells you how to deal with that, how to deal with addictions, how to deal with insecurity, how to deal with lust, how to deal with whatever insatiable drive that just ruins your life. You have to deal with it with subtlety. If you try and fight it, just like with Fenris, they tried to put a rope around him. He broke through all the ropes. They tried to put a chain around him. He broke through the chains. But when they put on this invisible rope of subtlety, and if you read the myth, you know what I'm talking about. That's my word, the rope of subtlety. But you go and read the myth. He can't get out of that. But what's happened is that Tiw's hand is still in his mouth. And so that means Tiw is still fighting him. That means the highest awareness must constantly be locked in battle with the lowest part of us. And it's a constant battle. And the moment that we step away from our highest awareness, that wolf comes in and starts to consume our whole life. And, he'll break free eventually. And so, we have to be aware. And this is, again, where spirituality comes in and meditation and all of that, because otherwise Fenris breaks loose and will destroy. I had somebody contact me again. This happens to me all the time. People will watch one video and then watch one or two videos and they think they know what I'm all about. And so, and they do what I ask people not to do. They contact me personally. And this guy contacted me personally and wanted to become he wanted to meditate and merge with Fenris to help the world. And he had this idea of who Fenris was. And, he had this thing about wolves and all that. And I didn't get a chance to talk with the guy. He was in and out. Most of these people are just loopy and crazy. They're in, they're out. But he was projecting his own thing and his love of wolves onto Fenris. And Fenris is not a cute, lovable like a wolf. If you've ever seen a wolf in person, I have. In the wild, I've seen them, and I've seen them. I knew a guy who had one, and I went and visited him, and it was a very interesting experience. That animal was. My first experience of it was that animal was magical. When I first saw that wolf, that my feeling was that wolf, it was a magical being, and I was actually frightened. When that animal locked eyes with me, there was the human part of me just kind of went into, I couldn't move for a moment. And so it's sort of like when people talk about when you look into the eyes of a cobra, that it kind of has this ability to sort of put you in a trance. So for our ancestors in Northern Europe, the wolf was not this cute shamanic creature. The wolf always represents this mysterious, extremely dangerous part of ourselves. And even when you've got Odin is the only one that, to my knowledge, has wolves. But his wolves, if you look at the translation of their names, it has the same thing, freak. And I can't remember the exact translation, but it represents ravenous, destructive, mindset. And it means that Odin has the ability to control. His awareness is so high that he has the ability to control these instincts within us, and he uses them But it's not a worship of the wolf. And listen, I've got nothing against wolves. I think wolves are really cool animals. In fact, if I had to pick among all of the animals that I choose to call totem animals, the wolf is one of my totem animals. So I'm not saying this out of any personal prejudice. In fact, I think people who go out and hunt wolves, unless they're doing it to protect their livelihood and their lives. I think anybody who goes out to shoot wolves for pleasure, I think, is asking for some major karmic repercussions. You don't mess with those animals. They have a right to be here, and they do have a power. When I looked in the eyes of that wolf, first it was huge. Wolves are huge. They're not just like German shepherds. They're just big. They're not. This wolf was very big, and its eyes when it looked at me, it wasn't like it was angry or something. I mean, that wolf was actually a little bit scared, like, who is this person? Because it was a wild animal. And it's not like a dog that goes, oh, there's a person. Hey, it's like, any new being is going to be, they don't think like dogs at all. But this animal was, I mean, when I looked at it and it locked eyes with me, it was like, wow, I felt this shock go through my whole body. It was a really intense experience. So, we're talking about Fenris, and we're talking about Tyr, we're talking about the south. So, what do I think goes in the south? I like to put, even though Balder is a sun god, I like to put the sun in the south. Not the sun. I like to put Balder in the south. The translation for the word Balder is bold. That's just the Norse pronunciation of our English word bold. Bald, bald-faced lie means, you're bravely lying. Bald, bold. Bald and bold are the same word, slightly different pronunciation. And so it means bold. It means brave. And Balder, if you know the tradition in the myth, is that he was invincible. That it didn't matter what you threw at him, he could just stand there like Superman and it would just bounce right off of him. In fact, why do you think Superman gets his power from the sun? He can stop bullets and all that kind of stuff. You see, even though the people who, came up with Superman weren't looking at the myths, these things are in our unconscious awareness and our unconscious memory. So Superman is also an aspect of Balder. And, what is when we're talking about Superman? When Superman is not being Superman, what does he do? He is mild-mannered. He's just another person. He wears glasses, and he's very mild-mannered, which means humility. So even though true bravery also encompasses humility, if you're truly brave, you have nothing to prove. So people who walk around and have to prove, how tough they are not brave. One of my martial arts teachers, I mean, I don't know if I think he's still alive, but I've never seen anybody as, I mean, if you put this guy in a room with 20 guys with guns and close the door, you would hear all kinds of noise and one man would walk out and it would be him. I mean, the guy had all kinds of crazy energy powers, and in terms of martial arts, he was untouchable. Easily one of the handful of most powerful martial artists in the world. He was one of them. So he was very brave that way, but I'm telling you that in terms of his ability to look at his own emotions, his ability to deal with intimacy, his ability to deal with meditation, these things scared the crap out of him. He couldn't do those things. He was so insecure. So we're not talking about that kind of bravery. There's a lot of brave people out there that would go and strap on a gun and go to a dangerous foreign country and die to protect their homeland. So they have bravery in that sense, but a lot of those same guys, you get them in a room and get them talking about feelings, and they can't handle it. They're so afraid of that. But that's Balder represents that kind of bravery to be your true self and to love. I have one apprentice who I believe, I have a few, but one of them is somebody who I believe has the real gift of seeds, which is to go into shamanic trance. And she came back after having seen Balder and described him to me. And she described him as being, I'm using my words now, but she described him as being very jovial, smiling a lot, laughing a lot, and he had red hair. And you have to look really hard in the mist to find out that Balder has red hair. And so does Thor, by the way. Thor has red hair. He's not blonde. Thor has red hair also. So these are aspects of the sun. You see this with red. The color red. By the way, the Chinese thunder gods, and as you know, Chinese people do not have red hair, right? So when you look at the Chinese thunder gods, guess what? The Chinese thunder gods have red hair. It means that the color red is representative of lightning, but it's also connected to the sun as well. So I would put Balder in the south because the south represents action, represents the soul in action, fearlessly revealing your true essence, taking action on your true essence. I use the word following your soul desire, taking action on your soul desire. So for me, that's who I put in the south would be Balder. I wouldn't put Tio down there. As I said, if there is a war god in the Norse tradition, it's Thor. But Thor is Jupiter and the sun and the moon. Actually, he's all three of those. We'll talk about that. So if we keep going, gosh, this is so hard. It's so backwards. This way, I can't even point to it, to the southwest, bonk. There's two deities that I would place there. I would place Loki there, for sure. The planet that goes there is the north node of the moon. The north node of the moon in Vedic astrology, which is what I practice, by the way, so please don't send me comments about Western astrology. We're talking about Vedic astrology. Vedic astrology and Western astrology were both came from a root system that was developed over 2,000 years ago in what is now Afghanistan. It was a city-state, and the people that lived there were astronomers and astrologers. And wise men from India and wise men from Greece both went there. They called it Bactria back then. They both went there and they learned from this city-state. And then they went back to their respective homelands. Western astrology is what the Greeks brought back. Vedic astrology is what the East Indians brought back. But the Greeks, for whatever reason, held on to the tropical zodiac. So you need to understand that the tropical zodiac is off. It's wrong. It's just the calculation for it is wrong. It means you're looking off into the sky in the wrong direction, and it calculates things wrong. Now, 2,000 years ago, the tropical zodiac and the sidereal zodiac were completely aligned, and so it didn't matter which one you were using because you were looking at the stars above you. Now, when you look at, if you open up your newspaper, mine is September 17th, it says Virgo. Though if you look at your Western chart, it's going to be off by 24 degrees, which means that your planets may be in completely different signs and houses. If it is in the same sign and the same house, it's going to be off by 24 degrees, which is going to change things. And that's just, people say, oh, Western and Vedic, it's just two of the same thing, and none's better than the other. Well, it's either accurate or it's not. I mean, if astrology is just something we do for fun and it doesn't mean anything, then I'm not interested. This is either a science or it's not. And Western astrology is off by 24 degrees. It goes off by 1 degree every 72 years. And so after 2,000 years, it's off by 24 degrees, which means as time goes on, Western astrology is going to keep going off. So that's one of the reasons I use Vedic. Vedic uses the sidereal zodiac. And the sidereal zodiac, when you look at a sidereal chart, you're looking at the sky directly above you. Okay? So, in the Vedic tradition, the North Node is called Rahu. And Rahu represents all of your desires, your unfulfilled desires. On the positive, he represents all of your ambition, what you came here to experience, what you have strong desires for to experience. Now, ultimately, the game of this is that the soul comes to realize that everything in three-dimensional reality is ultimately unfulfilling, and that the only thing that will fulfill the soul is to go back to the source, to spiritual reality. But while we're here in this video game, in this 3D avatar, in this three-dimensional video game that the soul comes to play in, which we call human life, while that's happening, it needs to have a desire. So these are the things that you want to learn, that you want to experience, that you really, really want these things in life. And if it goes out of balance, then it drives you crazy. This is where we get addictions, and we get compulsions, and we get obsessions. That's when Rahu is off his rocker and he's not balanced. And so we have to balance ourselves with spirituality, which is Jupiter. Jupiter represents religion, spirituality, and Jupiter is the only planet that can keep Rahu in check, so the north node. So the southwest there represents the unconscious mind. It represents the underworld. When the soul is done with this life and it hasn't learned, or I shouldn't say learned because it's really not so much about learning. When the soul hasn't achieved all the things it wants to achieve, it goes into the underworld. And so this is where Rahu will take you. Rahu will take you to the underworld if you don't learn to see past his illusion. Loki is a magician. He's an illusionist. So is Rahu. Rahu represents smoke. And so, in fact, one of Rahu's favorite substances is THC, which is why THC does not bring enlightenment. It brings delusion. It gives you the illusion of spirituality, but ultimately it's just brings you nothing. It takes all of the energy from your aura. In case you didn't know this, the reason why your head feels so light is because it takes all of the chi in your aura and shoves it up your spine into your head, and your head blows up like a balloon. It's all the life force energy. But what ends up happening afterwards is it brings in all kinds of impurities from outside of your aura into your body. It's very hard on the liver. And that's why afterwards you come down and you crash so hard, and you have to sleep, and you're kind of... And people who are dependent upon THC have to just to get themselves back up to normal. So this is Rahu. It's an illusion. It's the illusion of spirituality, but it's not the real thing. And so those illusions, those grasping for that which is not real will take you to the underworld. Now, the other planet and the other deity that I would place here is Hela. Hela is the queen of the underworld. She represents the ultimate realization, by the way. She is the ultimate realization. And I would, as I'm talking to you, I feel a connection to Ketu as well. So Ketu is the south node. The reason why you don't see the south node anywhere is because technically the south node doesn't want to associate with anything. In the Vedic myth, Rahu is the head of the snake. So he has a head, and he thinks, and he sees and he eats, even though everything he eats falls out through his severed neck because his head was cut off. But the body of the snake, which has no head, has no ambition, it has no goals, it doesn't see, so it can't be deluded. It is just simply pure instinct. It's the empathic shamans who have a lot of empathic powers have a lot of Ketu in them. Ketu represents death, being released from the physical world. And so Ketu is only interested in the truth, and for him, everything that isn't spirituality is just emptiness. It means nothing. And so Hela is this, and I'm going off my own personal experience with her, which was, on the one hand, it was, when I talk about her, sometimes I get very emotional because she's the ultimate mother. There's no being in the universe that loves you more than Hela. She takes you exactly as you are with no judgment and will sit with you for 10 million years. And without any judgment, she will sit there with you until you're ready to let go of whatever it is that you're deluded by, or your self-hatred or your insecurity. Because when you get to the underworld, there is a place that, what the Christians call hell. There is a place of punishment, but it's all self-administered. And from your own self-hatred, you can create a hell. And you'll live there and you'll punish yourself until you're done punishing yourself. And Hela will stay there. She won't try and talk you out of your feelings. She will stay there with you in whatever form you need her to be until you're ready to let go. And when you let go, then she becomes this beautiful young woman. Hela is half rotting corpse and half young, beautiful maiden. The rotting corpse half of her is, again, your reflection. What you project. She's like a dark mirror. It's the best way to put it. It's a dark mirror that absorbs everything except your projection. So when you project your self-hatred, you'll create a hell where you're being abused and beat up and tortured. She'll reflect that. She's not doing it, but she'll sit there and allow you to experience all of it. And when you're ready to stop beating yourself up, then that reflection will change and you'll see her for what she is. She's a beautiful young maiden, which is, you'll see yourself as beautiful, and then you'll be ready to go on and leave the underworld. So those are the two deities that I placed down there, and the two planets would be Rahu and Ketu, Loki and Hela. Moving up to Saturn in the west. Saturn is the king of the Vanir. And so that's why the Vanir are placed in the west. In the mythology, you hear that the Vanir live in the west. The Vanir are called the elder gods, not because they're any older than the Aesir. The Aesir do not live in time. They live in timeless perfection. The Vanir, on the other hand, live in three-dimensional reality. They are the gods of three-dimensional reality. And so they experience time, they experience wisdom, and so they're the elder gods, they're the wise ones. And because, the Aesir aren't wise, they are pure. And they bring out our zeal and our faith. But the Vanir bring out our love because they have experience, they have wisdom, they have compassion. And so Saturn is the king of that, which is Njord. Njord is the king of the Vanir. And so that's the west. Anyway, moving on to the northwest, we have the moon. Let's talk about the moon for a moment. So from our perspective here on planet Earth, when you look out in the sky, you see these two luminaries that look sort of identical and size. And in terms of how they affect us, those are the two planets that really affect us. The sun obviously affects us tremendously, and then the moon has a strong effect on us. And so these are the two most, the sun and the moon. And these nowadays are representative of the masculine and the feminine, the sun being masculine and the moon being feminine. But in reality, the sun and the moon are both masculine and feminine within themselves. In this day and age, we see the moon as feminine. And what we are experiencing from the moon that is feminine is the rays of the moon. So the opposite of the sun, the rays of the sun are masculine, the rays of the moon are feminine. And the rays of the moon bring healing. The moon connects us. The sun isolates us because the sun is our soul, our identity. Me, not you. What makes me different from you is the sun. What makes us the same is the moon. When you look into the eyes of your lover and you see things, and oh gosh, we have so much in common, that's the moon. Venus does that too, but this is the moon, puts you on this ability to see into the other person and to be seen by the other person. It represents our thoughts and our emotions, but it also represents healing, the healing of the mother. And so, as you know, women are more, generally speaking, seen as being more emotionally connected, more intuitive. This again is the feminine of the moon, which are the rays of the moon, which are nothing more than the reflection of the sun. This is important to know about the feminine because, for the guys out there, what do you call that? The MGTOW boys. I won't call them men because they have issues with their mother, but the MGTOW boys, they will tell you all the things that are wrong with women. And I've known women that are wrong in all those ways that they see women as being wrong. So I know that those women exist. But that is the feminine that does not have the sun. It's like when the moon does not have the full light of the sun hitting it, it goes dark. And there's no healing that comes from it. We experience it as this black hole that pulls energy from us. And for men who have issues with women, that's how they experience women, because they'll only be attracted to women who are like their mother. So if they have issues with their mother, if their mother was not loving, was not nurturing, mine wasn't. She did the best she could, but she had a lot of problems. And in my early adulthood, I had a lot of problems with women, and I attracted a lot of women that just would pull the energy out of me and did all kinds of cruel, horrible things. And, I did my part too, but so I understand where the MGTOWs are coming from, but it's just simply because they haven't seen the moon reflecting the sun. But in order to get that from the moon, the sun has to be reflecting itself. It means the soul, the identity, the true spiritual self. So for a woman to give to a man what he truly wants, he has to be that spiritual king. He has to live his integrity. He has to shine forth the power of his righteousness, whatever you want to call it. That is when the moon opens up and reflects it back. The moon wants this direct sunlight on her. And then when she gets the direct sunlight on her, she reflects it back as this healing, nurturing light that brings everybody and everything together. And when you have that, men, when you have that nurturing of the feminine coming to you, there's nothing in the world that can stop you. And you will go and conquer the world. But the feminine has to have that. If you don't present that strength, not that, that weird asshole kind of strength, but the strength of Balder, which is this is, it's interesting when you go on dating sites. I personally, I wince every time I see it because I want to sort of say, what am I, your joker? I'm here to entertain you, right? Sort of like in what the hell was that movie? Goodfellas, I'm here to entertain you. That's my job. But when you look in the dating websites, when we'll say, make me laugh. If you can make me laugh, and every time that hits me so strange, like, really? That's what you want from a man? But that is Balder. Balder is jovial. He's full of joy. This is the thing, is that the soul, the essence of the soul is joy. And so the highest expression of the masculine is of joy. And, and making somebody laugh isn't just having a funny joke, because that's not where laughter comes from. The laughter that happens on a first date is the connection and the joy that you share and the warmth that you bring. She's going to want to respond, and she's going to laugh because she's responding to your warmth, the warmth of your soul, but your integrity and your humility, opening the door for her, tipping. Here they don't tip in this country, but that I'm in now. But in the United States, if you go on a date, tip. If you complain about the staff and she didn't come and the waiter didn't do this, and you're chintzy with the tip, the woman's gonna go. Balder doesn't do that. Balder says, I ate the food and you worked hard to give it to me, and here's a big tip. Thank you very much. He's generous. He's humble. This is what the moon is looking for, the feminine. Having said that, traditionally speaking, the moon was masculine. So if the external rays of the moon are feminine, the internal essence of the moon, which is mind, is masculine. The masculine part, meditation, is associated with higher vibrational energy. The feminine is associated with the power of procreation, which is the lower chakras. The higher chakras, generally speaking, we're talking about masculine. And so this is the meditation, because the moon is the reflection of the soul. When you reflect on the soul, then you get the masculine energy. So the moon, you can just call him moon if you want, or man, or mani in Norse, but it's the same root word. Man means mind, and it means the moon as well. And so humans, now if you look at this little graph right here, remember I said that Venus in the southeast was the essence of humanity? You go directly opposite that in the northwest and you're going to see the moon. The moon is the mind. It means that the reflective, meditative mind is shining down on the essence of the human. And, if I were to place one of the gods I would place there would be Freya. Freya and Freya both are essences of the Wains, essences of Venus. But Frey is placed there because he is the lord of Freya. Frey and Freya. Frey comes from the Indo-European root pra. Pra means expansive energy, which is why it's associated with prosperity. And the word prosperity comes that first root pra. Prosperity and progeny. These are all the expansive power of procreation. Procreation again, pra, right there. That same. You can't get rid of him. He's just there, and anything that has to do with expansion and creation and prosperity, that's Frey. He is the god of that. So Freya, you have Frey and Freya. Freya comes from the Indo-European root praja. Ja means the energy of, the Shakti of pra, the energy of pra. This is why Frey and Freya are seen as brother and sister and husband and wife. So you place him in the northwest, and he as the lord of praja, he is pra, she is the energy of pra. He is lording down, looking down at her from the moon, and this he's sending his power so that humanity will meditate. And when you see him, the period idols that were done 1,000 years ago in Scandinavia, you see Frey in meditative posture with a fully erect phallus. It means that he doesn't even though he represents sexuality and sex, he doesn't overindulge in it. In fact, he meditates on it and he controls that. So you see what I mean? You have these two sides where Frey keeps Freya in balance so that she doesn't overindulge, and at the same time she encourages him to indulge as well. So they balance each other out. Now let's get to the north. There at the top, you have Mercury. Mercury is Odin. Odin, Woden, he who is filled with the power of shamanic ecstasy, he who burns with the fire of self-awareness. He is filled with, people call it rage, but it's not murderous rage. It looks like rage to us, but it's somebody who's just frenetic with the awareness of the self. He has no boundaries in terms of his identity. His identity is everybody. This is why it is so ironic to me that the Odinists are racist. Because the least racist, none of the gods are racist, but the least racist would be Odin. He identifies with all awareness. He is all awareness. And so what this means is that for the Germanic tribes people, around 2,000 years ago, you saw a shift from worshiping Tiu, the sky father, who sits in the North Star and directs his people. The word Teuton, as I understand it, means the people of Tiu, people of the North Star, people of Tiu. The sky father, Deus Pita in the Vedic, Diu Piter, sky father in the Roman. D, we call him Zeus, but Zeus is the vocative. His name is actually D in Greek. D in Greek, Tiu in Anglo-Saxon, right? And Tiwaj, Tiu. This represented the king of the universe. But here we have shamanic ecstasy. And what Odin represents is he represents the intellect. Now, the intellect is not the mind. The mind is the moon. The moon reflects the spirit. And we see a shift. Remember I said earlier that Mercury really is the lord of this age because it is the intellect that is responsible for technology and communication. If it wasn't for, it's Mercury that has turned this into, a global. Listen, I'm here in Australia right now, and you're seeing this all over the world instantaneously. Once I load it, you can watch it instantaneously. I talk to people on Skype all over the world. Instantaneous communication. This is the intellect. This is also Rahu as well. Rahu it's like the effect of Rahu on Mercury to create this, but Mercury is really responsible for that. So Odin, becoming the king of the gods, represents the shift that was about to come, because who brought in and ushered in this new technological age was Northern Europeans. Ironically, again, Northern Europeans 2,000 years ago were the most primitive people in the known world at that time. The Romans looked at the Germanic tribes the same way we look at uncontacted tribes in New Guinea or in the Amazon. That's exactly how they saw the Germanic people. They looked different. Their skin color was different. They had these bright blue, green eyes, and they had red hair and blonde hair, and they were tall and muscular, and they just were these freaks from another planet. The Romans 2,000 years ago were actually very short, and they had darker skin. They had dark skin, and they had dark eyes, olive skin and dark eyes. And so imagine they show up, and here are these blonde-haired, blue-eyed, they were these strange beings from another world. They lived in a jungle. Germany at that time and all of those areas were Germany itself, especially Germania, was filled with swamp and forest and bears and wild boars and giant giant bison. It was just this wild place, and you couldn't take armies there because you'd be sloshing through swamps and rivers and forest, and they couldn't do it, and that's why they didn't conquer Germania. But so ironically, it is the people who were the least, uh, the most primitive, the least civilized, because they started worshiping Odin. Odin represents Mercury, represents the intellect. It is because of that, from a shamanic perspective, I believe that kick-started their ability to then come in and adopt, all of the things, mathematics and science and all that stuff. By the way, that was all created in India and in Arabia and in, Greece and Rome. None of that was created in northern Europe. They were very, they were, nowhere near all of that. But because they had been worshiping Odin, who represents the refined intellect, they were able to master that and then take it and then bring it to the next level. And so, of course, it was Europeans that brought communication and everything, all of that, to the world. And because they had, in my belief, because they had walked away from worshiping of Odin, that is why then technology has been used by Northern Europeans in such a destructive way. And so the sad part is, as the Hopis say, the Hopi Indians knew that the white man was coming, and they knew that if he showed up with a cross within a circle, which is what we call Odin's eye. You've seen those. You see that in Scandinavia 1,000 years ago. You'll see, brooches that are a circle with a cross in the middle of it. If they came with that, then they would know that they remembered who they were, and it would create a utopia, because they would bring knowledge of technology, and they would merge it with the earth knowledge of Native Americans, and it would create a utopia. But if they saw the white man coming with a cross without a circle, then you knew that all hell was going to break loose. So they knew this, the Hopi people. And by the way, to my understanding, the Hopi people are one of the only, if not the only, Native American tribe that was not carted off and taken to a reservation in a different area. They still live in the same lands that they've always lived in. And they say it's because they do their secret rituals that keep the world in balance, which they don't share with any outsiders. And so in secret they go and they do these rituals and songs and dances that keep the universe together. So, it doesn't surprise me that they knew, but it's because we walked away from the worship of Odin that this balance of technology and nature is there, and why our greed and our fear and our insecurity has been driving the modern age. But it was inevitable that those who worshipped Odin were going to be the ones who were going to bring technology for better or for ill. Because, to my knowledge, to my awareness, it was only the Germanic tribes that worshipped Odin. I don't know that any other, somebody connected to me and commented and wanted to connect Shukra Karya, the Vedic god of the planet Venus, with Odin, because he saw some similarities. But no, you got to look deeper than that. You got to look much deeper than superficial. Venus is Venus, and Mercury is Mercury. They're very different. Mercury is the intellect. And so the reason why Odin stands in the north is because the north in the Norse tradition is the realm of the waters of creation, which is the closest that you get to the void. The true void is outside of the 9 worlds. But the closest you get to the void is the northern world of Niflheim, the home of the mist, the home of the waters. And it means the reason why it's mist is because it's not water and it's not air. It's just sort of like this mist. It means it hasn't congealed into anything. So it represents pure potential. And so if we were to go into that realm bodily, we would be torn apart because we are specific. We have an identity. You know, our body is this, I'm 5'9", blah, blah, blah. And we have a specificity. But in that realm of the unmanifest, you would be torn apart because nothing's manifested yet. So the only being that's able to go there and retain his identity is Odin, because Odin is the only being that died to himself and whose entire being is consumed with shamanic connection. He's done this. He journeys to all of the 9 realms. No other god does that. He journeys to all of the 9 realms. He guards the north. But if you were to place him on his throne in the northeast, where Asgard is, but when he's off doing his work, he's off in the north. He's off in the north, and he is our guide to true potential. You know, I mean, if you really want to think about what you can accomplish and what you can create, Odin is a god to worship, because he will tell you, because he can create and manifest anything, because he can go to the realm of pure potential and survive. And it was in fact the Northern Europeans that brought all of this technology to the world. We wouldn't have it. I mean, nobody, I don't care who it is, the Chinese, Japanese, you know, all the high technological countries, they wouldn't have it if it wasn't for Northern Europe to bring that knowledge. You know, especially we could even say the United States. You know, Russia likes to claim responsibility for everything, but you know, the invention of the car, the invention of the light bulb, the electricity, you know, all that stuff happened in the United States, which was a Germanic, you know, colony of England. So is that, even though not everybody was of Germanic ethnicity, you know, who invented things, you know, George Washington Carver, who, you know, unlocked the potential of peanuts, you know, everything having to do with peanuts. He wasn't of European descent, but it was the essence of Odin that had come over from Northern Europe in that new land. It was Odin working through all these people to elevate the intellect to create all this technology. Okay, so we didn't talk a lot about astrology, but there you go. So again, go to astrology.thunderwizard.com. You can see there's 50% off to get a reading from me. You can even save more money if you get a reading from one of my apprentices. Hit the subscribe button if you like it. Hit the bell button. And that's it for me right now. I'll talk to you guys later.